Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1174, 1174, June the 27th, 2020, Saturday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, yesterday was another failed video upload. In fact, it failed twice yesterday, but it finally did upload. So I am still not sure what's going on. I'm leaning towards the fact that there's something going on with my service provider. They're having some sort of an issue and it's causing these failed uploads. But it's also possible that there could be a YouTube issue. From time to time, YouTube modifies the type of files that their platform will support, and I do upload in a MP4 type format, which could at this point becoming somewhat outdated or problematic for the YouTube platform. So I'm not really sure exactly. But I've had 3 of my 5 videos this past week have failed uploads. So it's a bit of a concern at this point. I am working on the problem, and hopefully this video will be uploaded with no problem, and it'll upload at the normal time. But continuing to watch that, at some point I'm probably going to have to modify what I do in a different way, and that's probably where it's headed. But for now, I'm just watching the situation and hoping it works itself out. Anyway, having said that, I just wanted to start today's video by following up a little bit on what I was talking about yesterday, issuing the concerns that I have about, the country and where we are headed based on what I see. Now, fortunately, today I was able to look at the positive side of this a little bit, and I was able to see that we are beginning to see some pushback at this point. And I expect that here when we get to July 4th, it being a big patriotic holiday, I think we are going to see some things come to a head. And I think on July 4th weekend, I think we are going to see some serious pushback from the, I guess what people call the silent majority. I think we are going to see some pushback. So I think there'll be a lot of people out flying their flags and enjoying their patriotism, I guess you'd say. And so I think we're going to see some pushback. I already start seeing it now. There are signs that the other side is starting, things are starting to wane just a bit, and the silent majority is now finally getting fed up, and we're starting to see a little pushback. And I hope that will continue in a big way in the weeks to come. I also want to just kind of recap a little bit about, or sort of capsulize a little bit about what I was talking about yesterday, specifically to the election, which is yesterday what I was kind of looking at. So I just want to point out a couple things before I get to the breaking news of the day, because there's not a whole lot going on Spygate related. So I just want to take an opportunity to drill down on this just a little bit more from where I was yesterday. So looking back at the 2016 campaign, there was really 2 things, I think, that was the reason why President Trump was able to be victorious. And I think that the 2 primary things were he revolutionized the campaign rally. Never before have we seen a president or someone running for president be able to use rallies the way that Trump did, because I don't think we've ever seen a candidate before who could generate so much enthusiasm and bring so many people into these rallies. What you typically would see over the many years of our history with presidential campaigns is a presidential candidate, let's say they go into a state like where I live in Ohio, they would have to do 30, 40 campaign stops during the course of the campaign season to reach all the people they wanted to reach. That'd be 30, 40 different campaign events they would have to do. But what Trump did was he, instead of doing 40 or 50 events in one state, doing these events where they bring in a few hundred people here, a few hundred people there, Trump would rent out a large facility that would hold, 10, 20,000 people, and he would pack the arena. So instead of having to do 40 rallies, he would do 3 or 4 and reach the same amount of people. And people were willing to come and go to the rallies. Also, just the general feel of a Trump rally was different from anything we've ever seen before. It wasn't like your typical stump speech, which is what politicians go out and give the same stump speech over and over and over again. If you go, if they come to Ohio and they go to 20 different places, you would get the same speech at all 20 places. And Trump was in 2016. It was freeform. It was freestyle. He would show up at a large rally, tens of thousands of people would show up, and he would just roll. He didn't really have a stump speech. He would just roll with it because he's got that kind of natural talent. He has a very good talent for this sort of thing, which is really separated him and Hillary by a mile. Hillary was not able to do what Trump was able to do because she didn't have that particular talent. So if Hillary would have tried to replicate what Trump was doing, it would have been a miserable failure. She would have had a large arena that would seat 20,000 people, and there would be a couple thousand people there. And everything that she said was focus group tested, poll tested, scripted, 20, 30, 40 experts, advisors telling her this word, that word, this sentence, not that sentence, no, yes. Everything was so compartmentalized and like that Hillary was not able just to go out and flow. But she can't. Like most other politicians, you know, they have to be very careful about everything they say because they have a lot of things they have to cover up. They can't trip themselves up, and they lie a lot. So if you're Trump, he didn't have to worry. He could just roll out there and flow. So one of the key things that Trump was able to do in 2016 that allowed him to do the unbelievable feat and win is the fact that he had an unconventional type of campaign rally, and he had the particular talent to make it work. And that was a huge factor in his winning in 2016. And the second thing that was important was Trump used, for the first time ever, a presidential candidate used a social media platform to really use it to counterattack the attacks that were being leveled at him, to be able to respond immediately. And in the book, Shattered by Amy Parnes, she talks about in one of the chapters how frustrated the Clinton campaign was, that they would spend 2 or 3 days sometimes with a large group of people in various locations on conference calls, strategizing and using all sort of tactics to try to put together just a simple, sometimes just a simple phrase or a couple sentences to get launch some sort of attack on Trump. And so they would put all these resources and all this effort into trying to come up with just a tagline or something they could throw out there that they thought would stick to Trump. But what Trump was able to do was every time they did that, Trump would simply respond within 1 minute to whatever they said. Within 1 minute, he would be on Twitter and he would blow it up. They would spend hours and hours with multiple people trying to come up with something to kind of put a hit on Trump, I guess you'd say, a political hit, on a word phrase or a series of sentences that were an attack on Trump. And they would have huge amounts of resources and time and effort to do that. And Trump would just, boom, within 1 minute, as soon as it was out there, he would get on Twitter and blow it up. And it just drove the Clinton campaign nuts. They had no idea how to deal with the fact that he could destroy hours and hours and hours worth of work by a dozen people or more sometimes who were being paid a lot of money. And Trump was just all by himself without any experts or anyone around, just him pulling out his phone. Oh, really? That's what you think? Bam, tweet. Sends out a tweet, blows everything up. And it drove the Clinton campaign nuts, according to Amy Parnes in her book. So these two factors, Twitter, social media, and the rallies, are huge factors in why Trump was successful in 2016 and why he will be successful in 2020. Unless his opponents are able to take those two things away from him. If they can take Twitter away from him and take his rallies away from him, he'll have a tough time winning. So that's why we see this effort on Twitter and Facebook to remove Trump tweets and other conservatives and other things like that. They know that if they can subdue him a lot or handcuff him and do things like that to shut down his presence, his ability to counterpunch on social media, that will be a huge factor that could lead to his defeat if they can shut him down on social media. That's one thing they're really trying very hard to do, and this is fairly obvious. And he knows it. The other thing is the rallies. If they can revive the coronavirus fear and try to create a situation where they can prevent people from coming to his rallies, either from the threat of coronavirus or the threat of violence against his supporters from groups like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, if they can make sure that they have a bunch of radicals who are going to harass his supporters, many of them do not want to deal with that, and they simply won't come out. And I think that this is exactly what we are seeing. The opposition has realized that these two things, rallies and social media, were two reasons why Trump was so successful. And if they want to beat him in 2020, they have to neuter him so that he cannot be as successful on social media or in his rallies. If they can do those two things, they can have a major impact on his ability to get reelected. So there are two things I think are critical, two things that do give me concern, because we can see the tactics that are being used to try to inhibit his ability to take advantage of those two tremendous advantages that he has with rallies and Twitter. That gives me concern, and I think that someone in his campaign better be seriously addressing this issue. And of course, the third thing I think that gives me concern is we know that they're going to try to cheat again. We know what's going on with these mail-in ballots. We know about the ballot harvesting. We know how all that works. And I think that they're again going to use the Chinese virus to try to force this idea of sending out ballots to everyone, which of course we know that's rife with fraud, and there'll be a lot of cheating. And remember, these elections come down to just a handful of states and a few thousand votes, and they know exactly where to target these mail-outs and these flyers and the cheating and the ballot harvesting. And I expect that they're going to do everything they can to do exactly that. So those are the three things I think that the Trump campaign needs to be really focused on, is to make sure that Twitter and other social media that Trump uses cannot inhibit his ability to get his message out and counterpunch. I think they have to make sure that these governors in some blue states or mayors in blue cities could cause him problems when he tries to have a rally in that city or state, because they'll use coronavirus to try to prevent him from being able to have the rallies. They'll also use their on-the-ground troops, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, to harass and threaten his supporters to keep them from coming out. And of course, I think that they're going to try really hard to try to do this mail-in balloting, and they're going to use coronavirus as the fear to try to make that happen. So I also believe that they're going to try to do something to make sure that Biden doesn't actually have to appear live on stage next to Trump in any of the debates. I think if he ends up becoming the nominee, and he already is the nominee, he's clinched it with the delegate count, but he could still be replaced at the convention or somewhere along the way. I haven't ruled that out. But assuming that it is Biden and Trump in the debates, I think that they're going to do everything they can to make sure, this may be Trump's greatest advantage against Biden, is a one-on-one live debate the way it's normally done. I think the Democrats know that, and I think they're going to do everything they can to make sure that Biden does not have to stand on a stage with Trump in a debate. So those are my issues of concern, and that is kind of my follow-up. I still am optimistic and fairly confident Trump will win, but don't underestimate the importance of the things I just talked about. And if the Democrats can be successful at all three of these things, cutting off his Twitter, cutting off his rallies, and cheating, we could very well see Trump lose. The Democrats won't beat him fair and square. There's no way. But they don't play fair and square. They cheat every way possible. They'll take every advantage and work every angle. And I hope Trump's people in his campaign understand that and are prepared to match them. It's a dirty business. You're going to have to get dirty if you're going to beat the dirty Dems in 2020. Now, I also think that normally I would say run on the economy. But we know that we're in a bit of a recession because of coronavirus. This is going to continue to cause a sluggish. It'll be a recovery, but it'll be sluggish. We really don't know. We can't predict the future 6 months from now, but there could be other things in the economy we don't see coming right now. I think it's a little risky to run on that, although he should certainly tout the fact that he had a great economy before coronavirus, and he is the man to lead us forward as we phase out of coronavirus. And I think most people, if the election comes down to the economy, then I think Trump wins. But looking at where we are right now and what I see coming up in the months ahead, it's pretty rare that I would say this because I almost always say it's always about the economy. But when you look at what's going on in the country, I think that the newest number one issue that may eclipse the economy is going to be the safety and security issue. I think Trump should really focus a lot on the fact that he is the guy that can keep you safe and secure. The law and order president who will not tolerate all the stuff that we see going on. I think there's a desire for people right now to feel that they have some safety and security. I mean, I feel safe and secure out where I live because I live in a very conservative area of the country and a very rural area. We don't really anticipate having any types of problems. We could have a local gang of ne'er-do-wells, but they would easily be put down just by our local police force. They just couldn't generate the numbers. Now, if they start busing people out of town into our community, then our sheriff's department would jump in. Our governor here would likely bring in the National Guard, and of course the citizens here are armed and will protect their property, and our sheriff has stated he will fully support the citizens using whatever force necessary to protect their property and their lives. So we feel pretty good here, but there's a lot of places around the country where a lot of people do not feel safe and secure, and we know that because we see people going out and buying guns in large numbers, including lots of Democrats, and in places you normally wouldn't think people would be worried about crime. It's not general crime they're worried about. It's the worry. They're watching videos and seeing these mobs, and they know that these mobs have talked about going, once they've done their work in the urban areas, in the cities, and there's nothing left to burn down and loot, they're coming out to the suburbs. And that's got a lot of people very nervous. So I think safety and security should be equally, Trump should put equal amount of emphasis on safety and security along with the economy as his number one and number two issues in 2020. That's my political advice. And one thing also we need to keep in mind is that something we were talking about that not many people are focused on right now, but I think is going to come into play at the convention and beyond for the Demo commies, and that is the fact that they are still a split and divided party. Biden has been forced to go way, way, way to the left, but when he does that, he is going to lose a lot of the blue-collar people in those key battleground states in the Midwest. And places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia. These are West Virginia, I should say. These are places where Biden being pulled so far to the left is going to hurt him. And that party is still not united. There's a tremendous divide in the Democratic Party. It's just being covered up right now because the media is not reporting on it. Biden is hiding in the basement, and everybody's focused on coronavirus and riots. So, but once we get past the conventions are over, and now people start focusing, then we get to September, and kids typically go back to school, people start paying attention to the election, and that's at the time when the pressure is really going to be brought on Biden, and he is going to have to take some hard positions, which is either going to put him too much as a center or to the right of the far left wing of his party, or he's going to have to go far left, and he isolates the center, and particularly those blue-collar type workers, black and white, Hispanic as well, who own a lot of small businesses in the area, and that could split the Democratic Party, or it's already split, but expose the fracture and split that we know exist, that's sort of being patched over right now. But it is going to rear its ugly head and reveal itself post-convention. So these are election factors that I think we all need to be thinking about. Just some food for thought. I'm not a professional political analyst, but that's just sort of my take on things. Now let's move on to a few other things. I also think Trump should make a major point of this election coming down to really two different views of America. This is big picture stuff now, not tactics. This is big picture. The big picture is what we really are looking at in 2020. We have two groups of people now that are being divided, as America is now being divided by the left. In a way, they're doing us a favor, because what they're doing is giving Trump a winning campaign issue, because they're dividing America between two groups, people who love America and people who hate America. So Trump needs to define this for the Democrats, because they're the ones that put the ball in play. I would define that very clearly to a fine point, that this election is also about the people who love America and the people who despise America. There's a lot more people in America who love America than who despise America. I would put a fine point on that, and I would write it till the cows come home. Well, we have some interesting news. Just looking through some of the news headlines of the last 24 hours. I'm going to kind of move into that now. A not so smooth segue into that. So I was reading a story, I'm sure many of you read it on the Gateway Pundit yesterday, about this demo commie who was a protester, or whatever you want to call him, an antagonist of America, was at one of these protests, and he got hit with a rubber bullet in the balls. Hit by a rubber bullet in the balls. And it looks like he's lost a testicle. So maybe they should start aiming lower, the way they did with this guy. Instead of aiming for dead center, aim a little lower. Let's blow off a few more testicles. That should slow them down, don't you think? We have Madame Botox, Pelosi galore. Again, she's as bad as Biden for dementia. And she's giving a little speech, and she says, she calls George Floyd George Kirby. George Kirby. Her mind's gone too, my friends. Her mind is gone too. And that could probably get her some votes for Dumbass of the Week right there, calling George Floyd George Kirby. I mean, now if Trump accidentally, or Pence, or a Republican accidentally called George Floyd George Kirby, it would be headline news. But with Pelosi, nothing to see here, folks. We have Jim Jordan using a very nice tactic in the House Judiciary Committee against the Penguin, Jerry Nadler. Of course, we have these upcoming hearings on Attorney General Barr and the DOJ, and they're investigating the investigation. Nadler wants to poke into that a little bit. That is going to scheduled to be July the 28th. And so Jordan has brought up a very nice tactic to Nadler, saying, well, you know, since we're going to have these hearings, and it's all about Barr and doing this investigation into the investigators, I think at that point what we need for these hearings is that we need to try to get some documents and some testimony related to the FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, so that we can be prepared for when Barr comes in. So this is a very nice little tactic that Jordan is using on the Penguin to get some documents and some testimony prior to those hearings. Now, the Penguin will likely resist that, but it is a nice little tactic and a nice little barb for Jim Jordan to use. Also, we learned yesterday that George Nader, if you remember him from the Mueller witch hunt, George Nader was one of Mueller's star witnesses, or what people would refer to as a star witness, more of a key witness. In fact, I think he was listed as like, I don't know if you remember this back during the Mueller witch hunt, but this is the guy who they had a lot of build-up to his testimony, and he was like either the number one or number two most important witness to the Mueller witch hunt, George Nader. And of course, yesterday we learned that he has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for child sex crime charges. He pled guilty to trafficking a 14-year-old boy from the Czech Republic in 2000, as well as a dozen or so other related sex offense type charges. 10 years in prison for Mueller's key star witness. Yesterday, Trump signed an executive order protecting monuments. Good. That means that now the U.S. Marshals will now be called into play. And believe me, these guys do not play around. The U.S. Marshals do not play around. So now they'll be protecting these monuments. And you can bet that the anarchists are not going to get the the soft touch that they've been getting from some of the locals or even from the National Guard. The U.S. Marshals will crack down on your ass right now. And so I expect to see a little more aggressive tactics being used on those who would destroy these monuments. And of course, we learned day before yesterday that Barr says there's 500 open investigations. They're reviewing lots and lots of video, and that they plan on arresting and charging a lot of these destructive little creeps and animals. Good. Devin Nunes on Fox saying that Obama and Biden need to answer some questions. Yes, that's a very good point. Now, there is no longer any question whatsoever, because for a very long time, people have been saying, what did Obama know and when did he know it? Well, now, because of these notes, compliments of Jeff Jensen, we now have the Peter Strzok notes, and I understand there's some Bill Priestap notes as well, that clearly prove that Obama and Biden were key orchestrators of the coup plot, specifically against Flynn, and of course the coup plot against Trump as well. So now there is every reason in the world, every reason now, that require that Obama and Biden be questioned by Mr. Durham or his investigators. You can no longer ignore Obama and Biden. And someone needs to be asking Biden if he will ever take any questions on it, which he'll never be asked by any Democrats or left-wing media. But there needs to be, in the other media, a lot of people raising that issue. And there needs to be some good hashtags going about Joe Biden being questioned about, well, let's face it, he lied to George Papadopoulos when he said he really didn't know anything about the Flynn investigation other than that they were going to have a Flynn investigation. Now we know that was a lie. And so there needs to be a lot of pressure on Biden to answer some questions. Now that we know he was lying, he needs to come clean. He needs to be dressed down about his dishonesty when first asked, and he needs to come clean about what he really did know and what role he did play in the coup. Can't ignore that, Mr. Durham. Well, we have the Dixie Chicks. It appears that they have changed their name. Now, I didn't even know they were still around. I haven't heard of these. I don't listen to Dixie Chicks anyway, but I mean, I'd heard about them years ago. I thought they were like disbanded or something. I didn't know they were still around, but apparently they are still around. And they decided to join the woke crowd and decided to drop the name Dixie from the Dixie Chicks, so now they're just known as the Chicks. Unfortunately, that's really upset the feminist. So now they're in trouble with the feminist. Because again, as we know, the left always cannibalizes themselves, which is what they're doing here. So now it looks like there's a big problem with the Chicks. So I think the only thing that they can do now is just drop the word Chicks. They had to drop the word Dixie. You drop the word Chicks. They should now appear from this point forward as the. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the. Welcome to the. Hey, we're the. Thank you for having us. That's how bad it is. You can't even name yourself anymore without offending somebody. You got to be the. Or it would be the, or the. Who knows? It's all stupid. Now, we are learning that Dana Buente was forced to resign, and well, we know that, but we now know the reason. He was forced to resign because, and it was from the highest levels of the Department of Justice, that would mean Attorney General Barr. He was forced to resign because he had withheld exculpatory documents in the Flynn case. Knowingly withheld exculpatory documents in the Flynn case. He could very, very well and should be charged with obstruction of justice. He's obligated by the court and by the law to provide exculpatory evidence to the defense. He was covering it up, and that's why his ass is out of the DOJ and he's probably looking at some criminal charges. He better be. More hit pieces on Attorney General Barr over the past 2 days. The Washington Post, the Daily Beast, NPR, all putting out attack pieces on Attorney General Barr. They have got their knives out for Attorney General Barr. He knows that. They got nothing. He ain't going nowhere. Now, just want to follow up on someone that we've talked about quite a bit. We had learned a long time ago that Stu Evans, who was the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Intelligence at the DOJ, we had learned early on that he was one of the good guys who was trying to push back on the coup, specifically on the Carter Page FISA, because he had to sign off on it. And now we're getting more specific details about exactly what did happen there. And it corresponds perfectly with the Strzok Page text where they're talking about him. So Paul Sperry had tweeted out about 2 or 3 months ago that he was hearing that Stuart Evans, this DOJ Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Office of Intelligence for the DOJ, was cooperating with the Durham investigation. So I'm going to go through a series of bullet point facts that will show us the series of events that sort of played themselves out with Stu Evans over at the DOJ and how he was eventually steamrolled and why he is now working for the Durham team. So his job, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Stu Evans, his job was to vet spy warrants before they went to the FISA court. He had to sign off on them. And, of course, we're talking about the Carter Page FISA warrant specifically in this case. So we learn now that what he was trying to do was throw up a lot of bureaucratic roadblocks to slow down the Page FISA because he had a lot of questions and knew there was something going on. He knew he wasn't being told the truth because he was asking a lot of questions that you would always ask, and he was not being given straight answers. So he knew that Peter's been stroking us was bullshitting him. And so he thought, okay, you want to bullshit me? I'll throw up bureaucratic roadblocks. And that's what he began doing. This began frustrating the Crossfire Hurricane team, and so that caused of internal conflict. Then we had the testimony of John Carlin to the House committee, the ones we just had released, and in his testimony, John Carlin testified that, in fact, Stu Evans was asking a lot of tough questions about specifically Christopher Steele, because it was allegations made by Christopher Steele that they were trying to use to get the Carter Page FISA, and they weren't answering Stu's questions when he was asked about specifically, what about this guy Steele? What's his motivation? Who's he working for? And he was never given the truth until, late, and he was never really given the full truth. Let's put it that way. Mary McCord, in her testimony, also admits that she never questions anything. She signed off on everything. And when she was asked by Trey Gowdy, was there anybody pushing back? She said yes. Stu Evans did push back very hard, several times. And, of course, we now know that the FBI tried to hide information about Steele that they knew. They tried to hide that from Evans, particularly that Steele was being paid by the Reverend Clinton campaign. They didn't want to tell him that. And he wanted to know who Steele was working for, and they wouldn't tell him. They finally had to admit that maybe he was working for someone hired by someone working for the Clinton campaign. Stu Evans, of course, rejected the FISA on Carter Page 3 times. When they sent it to him, he sent it back to them 3 times. That's when we got the Strzok text, where he said, Stu is nervous. I'm worried about what Stu will whisper in the court advisor's ear. We have another text, Strzok texting Page, saying he's currently fighting with Stu for the FISA. Then we have Page texting Strzok, saying, hey, this FISA probably will not go forward without a call from the deputy director. That would be McCabe. Then we finally have McCabe dealing with Evans directly, telling Evans he was aware of his concerns, but that we had to go forward and let the chips fall where they may. McCabe agreed then to what Evans wanted, which was to at least put in a footnote in the FISA application that Steele was working for the Clinton campaign. There you go. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See ya. Bye.